Hello, and welcome to another DEI Bites live. We are ready and to get going shortly. I just want to welcome you to obviously this forum, this DEI forum. This is, I think, the fifth one we've done so far this year, and they're all on the YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel, if you would like to go back and look at any of the other ones from the past. But let us get into it. First of all, I'll introduce myself. My name's Emma Jones. I'm the founder and CEO of Project F. And who's Project F? We are a social impact business working on the problem of the underrepresentation of women in technology. So you can find out a bit more about Project F if you wish at projectf.com.au. And you can also sign up there for our fortnightly DEI news snippet, which is where the DEI Bites came from. It's just a tiny little bit of news every 2 weeks about DEI, some stats, some whatever's going on in the world about DEI that is useful for you to know in your business. And quite often some tools and events and all sorts of things. So sign up there and you'll get that in your inbox every 2 weeks. I'm going to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting you from today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And an introduction to the topic of today. So the topic we're talking about is equal paid parental leave. What we know about this is it is an accelerator for gender equity in the workplace, and it's something that we have long since championed at Project F. There is definitely a growing understanding of the social impact of equalising care, but how does it actually work in practice? Is it doable? What are the ramifications? This is all the stuff we're going to really dive into today. We're going to be hearing from Emma Walsh shortly of Parents at Work. And then we're going to be joined by an engineering leader, Brendan Humphreys, who is at Canva. And he's going to join us in discussing the practicalities because Canva implemented equal paid parental leave a couple of years ago now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Emma Walsh. She is the founder and CEO of Parents at Work and also the Family Friendly Workplaces, which is a national standards accreditation. So welcome, Emma.
Hello, Emma.
Great to see you here today. I'm going to leave you to it. So Emma's got a presentation. I'm going to duck out and I will leave you to talk to our audience.
Thanks so much, Emma. I'm joining you from Camaragal land, everyone, here in Northern Sydney. It's great to be here. And thanks for showing interest in this topic because it's one that I love to talk to. And I'm always encouraged by the increasing desire for other people to know more about this topic. It's quite a meaty one. There's a lot to get through. My role here is just in about 15 minutes to sum up some of the key arguments around paid parental leave being equal. And I thought what I'd do is start with a couple of things. One, about government shifting paid parental leave investment, because there has been a lot of changes in the last two years and there's more change coming and it's very confusing. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what's the impact of those changes and what are we seeing play out for men and women around taking paid parental leave and why that matters. And then we'll be talking about business and how do they have a role to play in equal paid parental leave. So that's what we're going to cover off. For those of you that I haven't met, Parents at Work is a leading social impact business advisory and education provider. We support employers and workplaces to invest and develop socially responsible, family inclusive workplace practices. And why? Because we know that they are important to drive gender equality and work-life wellbeing outcomes. So as you heard, we advise, educate and certify workplaces as family inclusive. So that's the work that we do, and we've been doing that for almost 18 years. So we've got a huge, lessons learned in this space and have seen enormous policy change along those years, and I'll dip into some of that now. So, as I said, I thought I would start with the current state of Commonwealth paid parental leave so that we have a bit of a background as to what's changed and what's been changing. So in the most recent past, we had with the new Labor government, when they came in, they announced a significant change to paid parental leave. And that was the first that we'd had since its introduction in 2010. Up until then, there'd been very little change to the paid parental leave scheme. And so what they introduced was taking it up to immediately 20 weeks paid parental leave, with an intention of actually driving that up 2 weeks every year to 2026 until it reaches 26 weeks. And that will still be paid at this point at the minimum wage. The other key change was that eligibility income tests became much more, we would say, fairer and inclusive of many more families, whereas before that was more difficult, and it wasn't necessarily a catch cry for everyone to be able to have the access. This has a wider net now for more people to have access. The other critical thing that they did was allow the leave to be taken flexibly. Up until then, blocks of leave really needed to be taken, and if you came back or broke that block of leave, you were considered back at work. Now there is up to 100 days flexibility in terms of how you use it. And the other important change is that the combined paid parental, the paid parental leave scheme was combined. Prior to that, there was definitions around primary carer, the person who was going to do the stay-at-home caring, having access to the majority of the leave, and what was called dad and partner pay, where dads had 2 weeks leave that they could access at minimum wage, but only if their employer wasn't paying them to take annual leave at the same time. So that was abolished, and now we have one paid parental leave scheme. We do not have any different definitions around primary or secondary carer leave. Done that is to try and encourage more parents to share the leave. There is some further developments that are coming. Superannuation will soon be paid to those on Commonwealth Paid Parental Leave Scheme from July of 2025, but there is still no obligation on employers to contribute at all to paid parental leave or superannuation for that matter. So that's not to say that employers shouldn't do it, and we're going to have this conversation today. In fact, many organisations do see the benefit. In fact, over the last 5 years in particular, we're starting to see a good ramp up of employers investing in it. And the latest WGEA data tells us that 3 out of 5 employers now offer some paid parental leave schemes to top up the government scheme. So that gives you a sense of kind of the changing landscape of the government policies and where they're going. So what does it mean for business? As I said, there's still no legal obligation for employers to pay paid parental leave. However, there is an obligation to offer 12 months of unpaid leave to that of parents who do have a job to return to. And there is, a crucial role that businesses play here. The changes to the Commonwealth scheme highlight that employers do play that important role, and that minimum wage isn't sufficient for most families, nor is the length offered of paid parental leave realistically something that parents can share equally. As you can imagine, 20 weeks isn't much, and those of you that would have had children will remember what those first few weeks are like, and we need more on offer for parents to be able to genuinely share it. From a retention perspective, top-ups by employers do make a big difference. Most families, as said, can't afford to take the minimum wage off, particularly the fathers who see themselves as, in many respects, primary earners for a family household when their partner is at home having had a baby. So there is an option here for employers to really think about attracting and retaining the best talent by offering generous paid parental leave top-up schemes. So let's have a look at what the impact is. What are parents saying about some of these schemes and that are on offer? Now, this is fresh data, excited to share with you. We recently launched the key findings of the National Work and Family Survey for 2024. This is a report that's only published every 5 years, and it really delves into sentiment that parents and carers feel around different forms of family-friendly policies. And as you can see here, still lots of working families in workplaces feel a stress in balancing work and family commitments. And in fact, 1 in 4 still tell us, and that hasn't shifted in 5 years, that they are considering leaving their job. in the next 12 months due to the difficulties combining paid parental leave. You can see that access to paid parental leave is still majority women taking that leave, with men increasingly taking it, which is good. It's positive to see that. But certainly there is a desire to have more paid parental leave that either feel that they're not eligible for it, particularly the men, and that actually 41% of both women and men say it's just too short. So, you can see some of the key emerging findings there that really aren't shifting nearly as quickly as we would have hoped when this was last done in 2019. Now, let's find out why, the stark inequality that's on off, really playing out here, and the business case for gender equal paid parental leave. You heard from Emma earlier that paid parental leave is a great lever for gender equality and closing the gap, because we can see what happens here when paid parental leave is largely taken by women. Now, this is a little complicated, this slide, so bear with me. It's a great slide and one that often when I show it, people have a physical reaction to. It's from Hilda and credited to the Australian Institute of Family Studies and the great work of Jennifer Baxter, who I'm a great follower and fan of around work and family policy. And what it shows you is what is happening to men's lives and employment and their involvement in care and household chores versus mothers over time based on the age of the youngest child. So you can see on the graph that, let's just take the employment line for a moment on fathers and where their hours of work sit, but somewhere between 40 and 50 hours a week, fathers report doing over a lifetime of their children in the first 12 years. And you can see that that doesn't shift all that much when they welcome a child into the family. But just take a look to the right and what happens to a mother's career. A mother's employment rate almost never bounces back to the rate it was at prior to having a child. And so here we have some really stark evidence, longitudinal evidence that really shows the patterns that play out around women's workforce participation, their hours spent on parenting and childcare and household compared to men is significantly higher. And so that should be a concern for many workplaces. And we know that additional data to this, that men largely are only taking about 10% of men are taking paid parental leave. And of that leave, it's usually pretty short that they are taking. So let's talk about why. What's actually holding men back? Well, there's not just one thing, and it's not a silver bullet, and you can't just pay men to take leave. There are lots of different factors at play as to why men are not taking leave. One of the main ones that we've lobbied hard for, and thankfully the government listened, is the use of primary and secondary carer labels. So you might not think it matters, but when we develop a paid parental leave scheme and we say, here's our scheme, and for the primary carer, we're going to provide X, and for the secondary carer, we're going to provide Y. What that does in a family household unit is it forces families to choose who is going to do the primary caring load in that household. And what we see is over time that once that is set, it doesn't usually shift. And that means that that primary carer goes on for, X amount of years, could be entire 18 years of that child's life to do the primary caregiving responsibility, and that secondary caregiving is seen as not as important. So I think language and eligibility and labels is a really important one. The government has removed those labels, but there are still plenty of workplaces that still use those descriptions. Eligibility, length of employment against, due date. We do find that eligibility for paid parental leave, it sometimes has lots of caveats around it in workplaces where, you have to be there for 12 months or more before you've got access to it. And that you might only have, a short amount of access depending on your tenure and so on. That also works against men taking it. But I think probably the third one is one of the biggest ones beside the financial barrier, and that's the flexibility. There has been very tight regulation around when men can use paid parental leave. As I said, usually generally only if a mother is back at work, only if they're going to identify as primary carer, only if they take it in a block. All of those things have prevented men from getting more involved in sharing the care. So we welcome the government's changes to having much more flexible ways of taking the leave, and we see that workplaces are doing, introducing similar eligibility where you can take it a day a week over a period of time. And we also welcome the change that you can now take the parental leave over 24 months rather than just 12, which previously the government had restriction around as well. Now, the other ones are, harder to shift, really. Let's just jump to the financial barrier for a moment. Men still identify with being traditionally the earners in a family when a child is welcomed, because the other partner is going to be off. And so, therefore, any kind of incentive or disincentive to take parental leave, and depending on what income, impact that will have, all weigh up on a family's mind, not just that male's mind, but a family's mind as to whether the father can afford to take the leave. So we need to make sure that we know that when leave is offered at the right top-up rate, or at full replacement wage, men are far more likely to take it. But only if they work in an environment where stigma or unconscious bias around taking parental leave or other forms of flex for caring purposes is permitted. So if there's not a lack of role models, if there's a lack of awareness, or they see people, careers punished by not taking parental leave, it's a disincentive for men to take it. So there's lots of things to unwrap and unravel there that have not only to do with policy, but they have to do with cultural norms in an organisation. So, should paid parental leave be equal? What is the impact on employers? Well, maybe you've started to see from some of this evidence that we know that I'm going to jump to some wellbeing pieces here, and we'll come to the actual business economics of it. But if we start with wellbeing, we know that boosting fathers' uptake of paid parental leave has a positive impact on a father and child's health and development and wellbeing. And we know that's really important because when fathers are not present in families' lives or in children's lives, the development can be hampered, and those children are more likely to go on to have dysfunctional and challenging relationships as they grow. And so fathers do matter when it comes to being involved in caring for their children's lives. And I think that's probably been undervalued by workplaces. We do see that paid parental leave does increase women's workforce participation. So when they can stay connected to the workforce through paid parental leave, they're far more likely to go back to the work rather than leave their jobs and find it hard to break back in if they're not paid parental leave. And so all of that helps to improve gender equality and reduce that pay gap if women stay in the workforce. Retention and talent of lower rates of staff turnover with women who take parental leave, as I said, are more likely to stay attached to the workforce. But there's also an attraction piece here, and improved engagement and morale and so on, because when we see family-friendly policies more broadly introduced and embedded culturally into an organisation, there's a better uplift, less negative consequences, better gender equal use and access to those paid parental leave schemes, paid parental leave and flex schemes. So we do think that they are, workers are more likely to be attracted and stay in organisations that offer family-friendly policies. In fact, we know that work-life balance and those kind of policies remain one of the most attractive tools that organisations can use. They're one of the top 3 consistently that employees look for when starting to job hunt. And so reinforce company values. 75% of employees are more likely to stay with their employer because of the paid parental leave offering, according to Boston Consulting Group research. Considerations for employers. Well, we might get into this in some of the discussion that comes, from this session. I'm keen to hear from Brendan and what Canva have done and hear your questions as well. But it is really important for employers to start to be considering, as I said, first of all, if they've got a paid parental leave scheme, I'm hoping that you do on this call. But if you don't and you're introducing one, to really think about making sure that you introduce an inclusive, gender equal paid parental leave, and don't use the primary and secondary carer labels, because if so, what's the purpose of that? Start to have a think about, what are you going to give? What are the entitlements that are going to be on offer, and to whom? Often I've been asked to review paid parental leave policies that still refer to maternity leave. So you can imagine there's no dad looking at that policy thinking that it applies to him. So making sure that we're not putting in labels like birthing parent gets this and birthing parent gets that, but actually making sure that however a child is welcomed into a family, that paid parental leave scheme would be available. Have a think about how your stance on paid super on parental leave, of periods of paid and unpaid leave. We do see that superannuation is paid on paid parental leave in a lot of employers that have introduced a scheme, less so on unpaid periods of leave. I think the latest WGEA data has about 13% of employers investing in unpaid super or super on unpaid periods of leave. I think it is really important that you clearly align and distinguish between the government's paid parental leave scheme and entitlements in your own policy. In the past, we've seen organisations do top-up only, so they've very much attached themselves to the government scheme and then are just making up the difference between minimum wage and what their full-time equivalent salary would be. The issue with that is that if you entwine it with the government scheme, you're kind of then at the mercy of whatever the government decides to change, and you lose potentially control of your own paid parental leave policy, and there are complications around the administration of it as well. So I would really advise that you have your own company's paid parental leave policy as a standalone. I'd be looking at, if you do have one, how many dads are actually currently accessing paid parental leave in your business, and how is that likely to potentially shift given some of the new changes from government and also your competitors. That you're going to hear a lot more about this in the next couple of years. We're lobbying hard, and so are lots of other advocates. This is not going away. So dads will be increasingly year on year spending more time taking paid parental leave and other forms of caring, particularly as our workforce ages. It's a reality, and we need to make sure that the future of workplace policies does allow for that. And then, of course, how are you going to educate your people and your leaders around this change? Because often managers are the barrier to a good paid parental leave scheme delivering on the benefits for your business. So you may have a great policy, but if your leaders and culturally aren't aligned to that, don't really believe in that, and there's all sorts of opinions about it, then that might be working against you. And so I often say you can't just throw money at this problem. It is about culturally being very loud and proud about why you're investing in paid parental leave and what cultural shifts you're looking for in your organisation. So I might leave it there. I'm conscious I've just downloaded a lot of information, and no doubt you have some questions that you would like to ask. And Emma, I'm sure you want to bring Brendan into this conversation at this point.
I do indeed. So thank you for that, Emma. First of all, that was really enlightening. I've got scribbled notes, and hoping that we can get hold of those slides afterwards, because I think everyone's going to want to dive into them a little bit more deeply in their own homes, but also with their teams at work. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you.
Brendan is the head of engineering at Canva, and we've been working together for the last probably 5 years, I guess, something like that. And Brendan brings quite a unique perspective, I think, for the majority of companies out there, because they implemented equal parental leave about 2 years ago, so mid-2021, so more than 2 years ago now. So I think actually how that plays out in the workplace is going to be a great opportunity for us to dive into. The first thing I wanted to do, though, is I've got a couple of questions here that I think will be really helpful to kick us off. So Emma, can I ask you why, one question from Jean here is, why do companies offer separate leave? So this primary, secondary, birth parent, partner, birth partner, whatever. The place that Jean works at, they have two types: maternity and childbearing leave, and then parental leave. And it's quite confusing. And I've seen lots of policies. It is confusing. So why do they do that? Where does it come from?
Oh, look, it's historic and traditional mostly. I mean, Australia has a checkered history on its paid parental leave scheme. We're one of the only countries that didn't have one until 2010, years, other than the US. So we were late to the party. And what that meant was, and just not to confuse you further, but, public servants first had maternity leave introduced, I think, government was that private employers would follow suit. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it just stuck for a minute.
It just stuck for a minute, sorry. I was just saying, I mean, look, we've got, as I said, a checkered history. Public servants have had access to paid parental leave for a very long time. And when it was first introduced, there was perhaps intention from government that private employers would just follow suit and offer that. And that didn't happen for a long time. And then as we dragged our feet on a Commonwealth-funded scheme for everyone, employers started to introduce it. And they introduced it based on what they'd seen public servants have on offer. And then later, those that came later also introduced it based on what the government had put in place. And the government used primary and secondary carer labels. So that's why we have them. But there is recognition from government that actually that's an outdated way of, describing how people care and share care in a family household. And it's probably not helpful. So they removed those labels 12 months ago. And so that's why there's a myriad of different, descriptors, and why we still also have maternity leave and paternity leave as well.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so we've also got a quick question here, which I think is really one that I've certainly been interested to hear about as well before, is, are there any stats that that you're aware of on same-sex couples that tells us how taking parental leave influences their share of household and parental duties?
Yeah. There's actually some good evidence that suggests that same-sex couples have got some really great answers for traditional family households, that they're far more likely to actually share in those caring duties. However, they do experience much tougher difficulties, if you like, accessing those paid parental leave policies because of some of these descriptions like birthing mother or maternity leave and so on. So they find access to paid parental leave schemes generally much harder than traditional.
Because sometimes, in some places, you actually have to prove that you're the primary carer, don't you? You have to physically prove it. I find that quite bizarre.
There's still a stat deck required in workplaces. And so I would say, with my HR hat on, that paid parental leave is probably one of the most controversial HR policies that gets introduced into an organisation. Everyone has an opinion, and which is not always based on fact, and based on their value system or what they experienced. And secondly, we tend to find that they are so legalistic and pages and pages and pages long compared to other forms of policy, HR policy surrounding leave. It's not uncommon for an organisation to have a 20-page paid parental leave policy, which is just ridiculous. So, how can we just make sure we're not applying a bias around this to this particular HR policy compared to others?
Does it comes from a place of risk, though, doesn't it? HR is kind of grounded in that risk and compliance world of protecting the company against anything that might arise to hurt it from its people as an asset.
Sure, but there are a lot. I mean, obviously, the same could be said of any other form of benefit or leave that an organisation is providing an employee, right? And I would say that it actually comes more from, if we go back 20 years ago when they were first introduced into workplaces, more a reluctance for them wanting to be used, if I'm honest. Almost employers went, okay, well, we have to pay this, but we really don't want to. So how do we make sure we just make this actually quite hard? Which is awful thing.
Wow.
But actually, I think that's the reality of how it was 20 years ago. Yeah.
That sounds pretty awful. I've got actually one of our audience members was told when he applied for extended care leave, was told that fathers don't need as much leave as they aren't the ones giving birth. And that, I think that poses quite an interesting question because, Brendan, at Canva, or from what you've experienced and seen, how do you, even though you now have this sort of equal leave, how do you neutralize the gendered biases and obstacles on who is taking leave? Has work been done that you've seen on that?
Well, I think actually the change is societal mostly. We see demand for that leave now increasingly from men. This idea that we've got this kind of patriarchal society where the man is out earning money and that the woman is the primary carer is really starting to age. And we increasingly see internally, men who want to take that leave. They want to bond with their child. And we see there's good evidence to say that actually improves the attitudes that men bring back to the workplace. And when they return to the workplace, they're more empathetic. They know how to relate better to their women counterparts. And so it's a real benefit when companies adopt that policy that allows men to take that time and bond with their kids at their very early age. I'm of an age where unfortunately I did not have this benefit. And I think I really regret, one of the regrets I have is that I would have loved to have had the opportunity when my kids were very young to bond with them more thoroughly.
I think the experience I've had of talking to many people about this over the years is that what happens, and I certainly saw it in my own experience of having a child, is that where the dad has 2 weeks off at the very beginning and then goes back to work, the mum is then on her own for what is often quite a scary, uncomfortable, not to mention exhausting and lonely period of time, where all the stuff that happens with a 2-week or 4-week or whatever old baby, it is just that one person's responsibility to learn and step up alone, pretty much. And then the dad loses confidence. And then mum not loses confidence, but doesn't gain that confidence of dealing with all of those things because they turn up at 6-7 o'clock in the evening or whatever. And mum becomes default person to go to from that point onwards. And that never reverses. That's my experience. So I understand why men would want to be part of that instead and become more of an equal carer and parent, and share that strength of bond. I do have to bring up, though, the almost elephant in the room, which is cost. So the most common thing I hear is we couldn't possibly afford to do that, especially in technology, right? We've got a male-dominated environment where we can see the stats where, and Brendan's experience, obviously, of that is great to have, because you can see you've got a company with 1,800 plus engineers, and of course the majority are going to be men, and the same with the people on the chat whose companies they're here from. The leaders would say we couldn't afford to do that. So what's the answer to that? How do we approach that? What do you think, Brendan? You've experienced it so far.
Yes. Look, I'm not going to lie. When we were leaning into this decision back in 2021, I was very nervous for those very real reasons that we're sitting. We have an engineering org. I think back then it was about 1,300 engineers, predominantly male. And I was really worried about the loss of capacity, the key people that we might lose for extended periods of time. I have to say, having made the decision and then looking back on it now, it feels very, very logical that we made the decision, and it feels very much business as usual. But for those who are still contemplating this decision, I think the challenge is very real. And it's partly because you can really quantify the costs very easily in the short term, and the benefits tend to play out over longer horizons, and they tend to be a little bit more qualitative, so they're harder to measure. But I can tell you that I think the benefits have played out at Canva. We see the benefits primarily in retention. We have engineers who have taken time off, who have returned to the workplace refreshed. They have that strong bond with their child, which is fantastic for them. But I think it's also fantastic for Canva as a whole, because they bring, I guess, a more rounded self to the workplace. So it's that really positive cultural impact that we experience. But it also has forced us as an organization to strengthen some of our practices. So it really forced us to kind of double down on thinking about succession planning, thinking about reducing key person risk. These are all latent risks that every business faces, no matter what size. And if they're not addressed, they can hit you at any time. So we're much stronger for having taken these really positive steps. And it feels like, as I said, it feels like ancient history, and it's business as usual now.
That's really good points, actually, Brendan, because it kind of leads on to what would you say to a CTO at another company who has this question mark about, okay, how is this actually really going to affect my team? So if you've got a CTO, VP of engineering, a head of engineering, whatever, who's contemplating this, and that's where the risk in a business typically is going to be, is in where you've got the male-dominated teams. What do they do? How do they approach it? What should they look at?
Yeah, not going to pretend it's easy. I think that you want to put a kind of a hard-nosed business approach on it. I think you've got to think in terms of the risk that you face in losing your key employees, your key men employees. The reality is that this is a societal shift that's being increasingly reflected in policy within a growing number of companies. And if you're not offering these benefits, your best employees are going to start looking elsewhere for employment. So I think you've got to look at it in terms of retention. You face the risk of losing your key employees if you don't offer this leave. And that's obviously a much bigger impact to your business than allowing them to take this leave and then return to the workforce.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it, actually. I think, and Emma, I'm interested to hear what you think about this cost and this doubling down on like succession planning and risk as well. How do you see that playing out, and what have you seen elsewhere in companies that have faced this?
Yeah, well, similar to Brendan's views here. I mean, look, is it a cost or is it an investment? I think the argument would be said that it's an investment in your people and that helps you attract and retain people. But it's also an investment in the health and well-being of your people and them needing to be their best selves to come and do a great job for you. And also, I guess the fact that, look, any employee at any time could have a life-changing moment, right? They have an accident, they get sick, and they're out. And you as a workforce or a workplace have to work out how you're going to manage that, right? Often with little notice and, no plans in place. When someone is having a baby, generally you've got 6 months notice as a workplace to figure it out as to how you're going to manage that situation with that person absent. That's a good amount of time, right? And so it's not like it happens overnight. And so it should be, as Brendan said, part of the planning process for succession planning, as you say, and risk mitigation and so on. So I don't know that employers have really tapped into that enough. It's still seen as this kind of welfare payment that we kind of have to feel like we have to do, and how annoying. But actually, I would say you can't really afford not to be offering and investing in this for all of those reasons.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I want to come back to that in a second, about sort of more a global view and what's coming down the pipe towards us. But we've got a question here about the amount of parental leave employers should offer. Is there a recommendation for that? Do we have any kind of benchmarks at all?
Yeah, well, WGEA would say that the minimum amount, and in terms of that policy to be effective, would be 13 weeks. So anything 13
Okay.
weeks off would be ideal to offer. That's where we see the sweet spot in it delivering for you. The government would say they want you to go hand in hand with them. And if they're going to invest in 26 weeks paid parental leave, they'd like you to offer 26 weeks too. And that would, very conveniently allow it to be 52 weeks, which is much more in line with the OECD average that it's offered. However, there's plenty of organisations that can't afford necessarily up to 26 weeks, because obviously the longer people are away, the more likely you need a backfill and all of those things. So it's not as simple as that. And we do know that the government could and should be investing more. And, they do have an intention to 26 weeks by 2026. But after that, there's silence. What happens after 2026? What are we doing? We need a long-term vision for Australia to improve this over time to keep up with other nations. We know that we've got a falling birth rate here. The Treasurer is saying we need more babies, all of these things. Well, we need to make sure that we've got the systems and policies around us, both from government and employers, to make that a reality. And at the moment, Australia is not one of the best places to raise a child in terms of costs. So, we need to fix that if we want to attract the best talent from around the world.
That was going to be my next question. Was so I've just posted up here that there is that in the UK, equal parental leave seems to be falling consistently between 16 and 26 weeks of fully paid leave, the latter being the equivalent of 2 to 3% of an organisation's annual payroll. So again, Sammy, hopefully that helps with just getting a sense of the what the expectations are beyond just Australia as well. So it does look like we're a little bit behind in Australia, which was kind of going to be my next point. And this is, Brendan, thinking about global talent and attracting talent to the workplace and having the ability to attract more than just what we typically get in our pipelines. And in technology and engineering, one of the hardest things is to find a diversity of talent. We do tend to be stuck with these very male-heavy shortlists and application pipelines. So how important would you see it as for, if you were not at Canberra and you were at another company, if you were going somewhere else, not that you're going to, but would you say to them, we should be doing this? And would the global conversation come into it about getting talent?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think COVID taught everyone that remote work is possible. I think the future of work is increasingly remote and asynchronous. Certainly at Canva, we have grown to be a global company. I have engineers on 5 continents working in many different time zones. And I think that is the future in general. Your point about local talent versus global talent, if you can tap into a global talent market, you've got a much higher maxima of talent. The reality is in Australia, you've got limitations. So if you want the very best, then you need to go globally. And that means attracting the right talent and matching the conditions that they expect. And if you're in Europe, as Emma alluded to, that means lifting the entitlements accordingly.
I think that's and that is the next thing is, are we getting left behind? And is this coming anyway? Emma, do you see evidence that this is a growing trend? In terms of, you mentioned competitive advantage and retention in your talk, and I think this is an important point for companies to consider. Is this going to come anyway at some point? Is this going to be something that everybody kind of has to offer?
Yes, I think so. I mean, look, around the world, countries are really grappling with this and they're throwing everything they've got at the problem. In fact, some countries have tried to put into their economic strategy that they're going to be a family-friendly country and then put all their social policy vision very clearly outlined for the next 10, 20 years with, continued investment in things like paid parental leave and childcare. And as I said, we've got a very short vision for this and we need to, really be thinking about, what is it for the next, 10, 20 years? If we do need more children and we know that more broadly caregiving is just going up in the country, what is it that we're going to do? What levers are we going to pull? And ultimately, it's in workplaces' interests to solve for this, because if they don't, then government's going to come in and impose what they think. And so if we can get workplaces coming to the party with this, thinking about how they can chip in to what I would call the village problem, I think that, that's going to go a long way in helping solve it more quickly. But I would say, and I put it in the chat, that we do think, and I'm a small business owner too, I do get it, that it would be good if the government incentivised businesses through tax relief or other means in order to invest in paid parental leave or things like childcare. At the moment, any kind of childcare support, unless you employ someone to provide that service for your people, would attract FBT. So that's a disincentive for employers to be investing in family-friendly policies. So how do we do that? And I do think that if that was the case, just like we've seen incentives given to businesses to employ people in trades or young people, that actually does improve employer behaviour at hiring those people. So we know that particularly for women, there's still plenty of workplaces that really think, I don't really want to hire a woman of childbearing age because she's just going to take leave and we won't have her. But if we were to normalise caregiving, incentivise workplaces to introduce those kind of policies, and as something that anyone in the organisation could use at any stage in their lifetime, then it no longer becomes a gendered problem or a woman's problem in particular. And the individual, then ripple effect that happens around women's wellbeing and financial and economic outcomes over a lifetime. And it's again in our interest to solve. My sort of closing point on this would be, from an organisational point of view, do you want to be an organisation that's helping or hindering women's participation in the workforce, but also children's development outcomes, the future workforce that you're trying to attract to work in your companies? Children have, are absorbing parent stress. They are probably far more likely to be aware of where their parents work, because more work is done flexibly or on the screen like we're doing now. So it's just more visible to children, and they're forming opinions every single day about your company, about how good mum or dad's boss is, how flexible they are, what it's like culturally to work for your brand. And so, I don't think employers have quite clocked that there's, a future generation of workers. I know my children who are about to enter the workforce next year are super aware of this, and we have lots of conversations about which are the best companies to work for that are going to look after their wellbeing.
That's such an interesting perspective. I hadn't even really thought about that side of it. And I think that's super important. I think also, though, there is we've also got this phenomenon of greedy work, which this sees, and it does exist in technology for sure. This kind of, we've got a tech bro stereotype in technology, which is really hard to shift. Line managers are recruiting quite often in their own image. They value and celebrate the sort of traits that are kind of unhealthy, what we call this greedy work of long hours. There's a bit of presenteeism going on, and a culture that doesn't necessarily allow for paid parental leave to really embed. So if we do equalise paid parental leave, how do we make sure that the culture reflects the policy? I'm really, this is a thing I'm really interested in as much as the people listening are going to think, okay, great. Well, let's say we get this over the line. How's it actually going to even play out where we've still got this, tech is driven by venture capital. It's all about, you've got to grow, it's got to be fast, and we've got product that has to be shipped, it's got to be quick. All of these things are competing in a cultural sense to create a culture where equal parental leave can really be a hard one to embed. So how would you deal with that? I mean, this is a question to both of you, really.
I can certainly speak to our experience at Canva, but I want to build on what Emma W was reinforcing by adding that ultimately this is strengthening your company's culture and strengthening it in really positive ways for your business. So you get better business outcomes with a stronger culture, with a happier culture, with a culture that really cherishes sustainable workplace environment where you're not overworking people. At Canva, we've really strived for that culture, and we've put a range of programs in place to support it. Our leadership team really strives to lead by example. The policies we've put in place, things like creating family-friendly work culture, flexibility in working hours, providing spaces for parents, being really mindful of school holidays in company planning. I keep using the word strive, though, because this is really hard, particularly for smaller companies. And in some senses, this is still hard at Canva because we're still very much in that fight or flight mode as a company. For those of us, particularly in senior leadership roles, who've been here for a long time and are very committed, the way that I try and combat that in engineering at Canva is to really send this message of empowerment to individuals to take more ownership of their own work-life balance and to really encourage personal leadership, which means they have to really try and find their own sustainable balance, and we're going to support them in doing that. The reality is that if you're younger, you don't have dependents, maybe you can commit more sustainably to work, and that's great. But we want to create an environment where everyone can find their sustainable balance. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I've got another question here, which is from someone on YouTube. But so, what is if somebody says we think our mums, our women in our business want more parental leave, then they think that women should be entitled to a longer period of paid parental leave than men because of what they have to go through physically. What's your answer to that, Emma? I know what mine is, but what's yours?
Well, just from my own personal experience, I had twins. I definitely needed my husband there when we came home with them. I couldn't have done it without him in those first few weeks. And I remember having to cobble it all together. I mean, he had to take carers leave, annual leave, a bit of sick leave, a bit of this, that, and the other, because I'd had an operation as well. He was absolutely needed there to care for me. And I think that's getting, you touched on it, Emma. That's the first thing. But secondly, there's all sorts of different experiences. We talked about same-sex families for a start. Every family and how they welcome a child has all sorts of different circumstances. Children get born early and sick and hospitalised, and and the list goes on. I think it's just such a utopian, really weird view that it's sort of like, like they're not going to be relevant or needed. I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, that's not how it plays out. Most people. And I also went back to work quite early because I was running the business. And so we had to do a bit of a swap too, where he needed to be, well and truly in the saddle doing a lot of the caring load, well before the expected sort of time off that I'd had in incubation of getting better, if you like, because there's often this view that, oh no, well, women will need 3 months off to recover, and that's what they're getting the parental leave for. That's not true necessarily either. So we do need to break down these myths and just downright not factual comments people make that are really unhelpful.
I actually have heard that from HR leaders who have said that, oh, well, our women, that can be an argument. It often gets pushed back when we make it as a recommendation, and it's often that, or not often, but it has happened on the odd one or two occasions where it's HR leadership saying, actually, our women they think that women should have, that the birth parent should have more, and you kind of go, that doesn't make sense. But yeah, okay. So do you think this is going to affect the gender pay gap? If a lot more companies get behind equal parental leave, will it have an impact on the gender pay gap?
Well, all the evidence would suggest, yes, it does. But as you've heard from Brendan, it may not be something immediately within months you see in your workplace. But, over time, the decisions that people, choose to make around why they stay in your organisation or what attracted them to you in the first place, I think it is really important that organisations measure impact. Social impact. We're used to measuring our financial well-being. We're used to measuring environmental footprint, but we're not really that good at measuring our social impact in organisations. So I think it's important you get feedback on as people come into your organisation. Why did they choose to work for you? And why were they attracted to the kind of family-friendly policies, and how important was that to them? And equally, as they leave, what was that about as well? And everything that happened in between in terms of engagement, surveys and anecdotal feedback that you receive as to why people love working for you. So I think it's really important that we gather that evidence, the voice of the employee in this. The employee will often tell you about whether your policies are good enough. Your attrition rate, your absenteeism rate, all of those things are factors in whether your social impact is high or low. And I think we need to be taking note of that, because it absolutely does fundamentally have a bearing on not only your gender inequality and pay gap problem, but more broadly probably your productivity bottom line.
Yeah. I agree. I can definitely see that there's a big benefit to it in so many different ways. So I think we've got to wrap up, and I do want to say that there's a website that's across the bottom there for Parents at Work, for anybody who's tuning in that has equal parental leave and maybe hasn't been recognised for it. There's a part of Parents at Work that does actually highlight the equal parental leave efforts being made by companies, and I know Canva's on that list. There's quite a few other of our clients, accredited companies, that are on it as well. So do get in touch with them if yours is and you want to be recognised on there. Brendan, is there anything you wanted to close out with as far as from your experience of leading in this?
Well, I just reinforced that leading into this decision, it was scary, and it felt like quite a hill to climb, quite a psychological leap to make of faith. But being on the other side of it, I'm really glad that we made the decision when we did. I think we're a stronger company for it. We've had a great uptake of the policy by men, and we're seeing a lot of those people return fully nourished and productive in the workplace. So I think this has actually been a huge positive for Canva, and I'd love for other people to follow in our footsteps. I know it's a challenge. If anyone wanted to reach out and talk more of the kind of gritty detail of implementation, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation.
I think that's a really important one. Thank you, Brendan, because I know there are a lot of organisations that have this on their question list or something that they would like. And we also have a business case, by the way, on our website, which once the report comes out, Emma, which is next week, is it? The latest report?
Yes.
We'll update our business case for it. But we have a free download on our website with the business case for equal parental leave, just to help have those conversations internally, which anyone can go and check that out. As I say, I'll be updating it after the Parents at Work report comes out very soon. But other than that, I just want to thank you all for coming along and contributing in the chat to the questions and the discussion we've had today. Thank you, Emma, for everything you do in this space, because I know it's a lot and it's incredibly important work. And thank you, Brendan, for bringing that unique perspective. I think it's been a really big eye-opener for a lot of people here, that just to hear exactly what the ramifications are, and having that sort of long-term vision rather than short-term that wins in the end, and actually is going to stand Canva in good stead for the long-term health of the business, which is a view that often gets overlooked, I think, on these things. So thank you all. I'm going to end the stream now, and we're going to stay on here and probably have a quick chat about it. But thank you all, and we'll be sharing all of this in emails to you afterwards. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.